The last two papers speak to the essential place of concepts about souls and, more generally, personhood to domains of culture beyond death, the creation of alliances among communities, and the matter of placemaking and territoriality. Ideas about soul-like essences permeate many domains of culture in non-Western societies. This is why they are so important to understanding the motivations of most non-Western peoples in their daily and ceremonial lives. The next paper is given by me, Christopher Carr. It shows how ancient Hopewellian peoples in central Ohio harnessed soul concepts strategically to form intercommunity alliances. My paper is entitled Scioto Hopewell Souls and Intercommunity Alliance Making, 3 Worldview Metaphors that Scioto Hopewell Peoples Lived. Good evening. It's a pleasure to share this time with you. Today, archaeologists and laypersons experience ornate Scioto Hopewell earthworks, art forms, and mortuary layouts from a time and worldview different than those of the native peoples who created them. We wonder, what on earth was in the minds and hearts of the people who made these things? Why did they take such effort? What were they trying to do? Human motivation is one of the core issues that anthropologists try to fathom. The choices for action that peoples make and their consequent social and material productions can stem from many causal factors. Archaeologists commonly focus on natural environmental conditions and changes, subsistence changes, population pressures and distributions, the political aspirations of leaders, and the political economic strategies of leaders when explaining the material works and social configurations of past peoples. Much less evoked are their most basic worldview assumptions and their specific religious ideas. Yet, looking at our world news reports today, we see worldview and religion to be frontline drivers, motivators of human choices and actions in both nation-states and traditional tribal groups. Worldview should have a central place in the explanatory frameworks of archaeologists. Basic worldview assumptions, such as the nature of one's soul or the essence of one's family and community relations, can be hard to articulate verbally. Often, they are largely intuitive, having been ingrained in a person during childhood through simply doing and experiencing life. Thus, in practice, worldview assumptions are often not expressed explicitly as defined principles, but instead are made more tangible through cultural metaphors and their behavioral or material symbols. For example, we use the metaphor blood is thicker than water to describe the almost indefinable physical, emotional, and social links among family members compared to those with others outside the family. The Cheyenne use a similar metaphor, but for their whole tribe, which is captured in their term for themselves, Hestanova, heart shared among group. This evening, I will explore some of the motivations that led Scioto Hopewell peoples to create their elaborate earthworks and to perform their extravagant mortuary rituals in the ways that they did. I will do so by clarifying 3 of their worldview metaphors for interpersonal cooperation, which they harnessed when building intercommunity alliances. The 3 metaphors are: first, placing in close proximity multiple individuals' bodies and souls equals creating social relationships of cooperation among those individuals. Second, melting together the ritual paraphernalia of different communities equals blending the souls of the ritual participants from different communities and creating social relationships of cooperation among them. And third, the domestic dwelling equals the charnel house equals the family, and in turn, the extension of family-like ethics of cooperation to larger social units. My insights are drawn from the ceremonies of the historic Huron, Cherokee, Munsee-Delaware, and other woodland tribes. Between approximately AD 275 and 350, the central Scioto drainage was home to 3 Hopewellian communities, one in the main Scioto Valley, another in Paint Creek Valley, and a third in the North Fork of Paint Creek Valley. The 3 communities built a social, ceremonial, and spiritual alliance among one another. They used multiple means, jointly constructing earthwork ceremonial centers in one another's lands, holding together many kinds of rituals in ceremonial centers in one another's lands, sharing the same sacred geometric principles by which centers were designed, trading utilitarian and prestige goods, intermarrying, sodality and clan ceremonial organizations whose memberships cross-cut communities, and burying their dead together within shared charnel houses. Many lines of archaeological evidence point to the alliance among the three communities. The multiple three-part earthworks that occur in the three valleys, the repeated design of the earthworks as two circles and a square, each with consistent areas across earthworks, multiple cases of three-room charnel houses within ceremonial centers in the three valleys, the demographic characteristics and social role diversity of each of the burial populations within each charnel house room, which match the profile of a community and suggest that three communities bury their dead together within single charnel houses, the capping and joining of all three rooms of a charnel house and the interred members of the three communities under a single unifying mantle of earth, the large labor pools used to build each earthwork, which overlap across communities and valleys, and the complementary celestial orientations of the earthworks, which suggest a calendar of rituals that rotated among ceremonial centers across the three communities. Of the several strategies that Scioto Hopewellian peoples used to build intercommunity alliances, the most intimate, personal, potentially dangerous, and most irreversible was burying the bodily remains and souls of deceased loved ones from multiple communities together, forever, within a common charnel house and burial mound. The potency of the practice arose in part from it entailing three worldview metaphors of interpersonal cooperation. These metaphors were shared by the three communities, can be traced back in time to at least the late Archaic in other burial sites of the Midwest, and have continuity into the historic period among numerous woodland Indian tribes. The first metaphor that Scioto Hopewell peoples used strategically in creating their intercommunity alliance is the equation between placing multiple deceased individuals' corpses and souls close together spatially, and creating cooperative relationships among those deceased and among their descendants. This metaphor was harnessed by burying the dead from multiple communities together within the same charnel buildings. The same metaphor and a similar practice were used by the historic Huron and Algonquians in their Feasts of the Dead. The Huron knew an individual to have multiple souls. The free soul became an earthly ghost and then went on to an afterlife, while several body souls remained in the bones of the deceased most permanently. Huron from multiple settlements of a community and other communities in the tribe, as well as allied tribes and occasionally tribes seeking alliances with the Huron, brought their deceased relatives, mainly as bundle burials, to a host village. There they deposited the deceased bones in one ossuary pit and stirred the bones together, intermingling the bones of different individuals irretrievably. This action was said explicitly by the Huron to intermingle the souls of the deceased, creating an eternal spiritual alliance among the deceased, which the living were then bound to honor. Cooperative social relationships within communities, among communities, and across tribes were thereby created. Analogously, the Scioto Hopewell are known to have recognized that an individual has a free soul that proceeded at death to an afterlife, and multiple body souls that remained in the bones. Rich mortuary evidence for these Hopewellian ideas are reported in Heather Smythe's and my earlier presentation in this symposium. Scioto Hopewell peoples from different communities also interred in close association and encapsulated the bones and body souls of their deceased within a single charnel house building or building complex repeatedly at burial mounds in all three river valleys: Hopewell Mound 25, Site Pricer, Edward Harness, and the Porter Mound Group. Also, in most of these instances, the charnel house was additionally covered under a shared mantle of earth. The logic, motivation, and potency of these actions for building intercommunity alliances rested in the basic Scioto Hopewell and Woodland Indian worldview metaphor that equated placing souls physically close together and forming cooperative social relations. The metaphor makes sense of why Scioto Hopewell peoples built three-room charnel houses, buried their dead from three communities together within these buildings, and reiterated the three-part design in the layout of their earthworks. In this light, Scioto Hopewell worldview has a core place in our explanatory frameworks for understanding the motivations, choices, actions, and material social productions of Scioto Hopewell peoples. A second metaphor that Scioto Hopewell peoples use strategically when forming their intercommunity alliance goes beyond the matter of placing souls of the deceased in close proximity. Here, souls were actually blended or merged with one another. This action was equated with forming cooperative relationships among the souls. The metaphor is well documented in the historic Cherokee Foundation for Life ceremony. In times of crisis, when the cooperation of all Cherokee of the tribe was essential, the leaders of each of the 7 tribal clans met, placed their clan tobaccos in one pile, stirred it, and smoked it in one pipe. The formula they recited envisions the 7 clan leaders blending their bodies and souls with one another within the same powerful spiritual beings and releasing the light of the sunland everywhere, which intimately associated all the clan leaders and clan members of the tribe and ensured their cooperation. Similarly, the historic Munsee-Delaware began their meetings by blending together the smoke of their tobaccos in order to, quote, mix and make one their minds and spirits, unquote. That is, to forge interpersonal cooperation. In like manner, the Scioto Hopewell from multiple communities piled together the ritual paraphernalia and the personal ornaments they wore during joint ceremonies in charnel houses, doused them with a highly inflammable pitch or fat, and burned them together in basins with such intense heat that bundled copper ear spools melted and ran together, as shown here, and seashell plummets fused. By analogy to the Cherokee and Munsee rites, these acts would have blended together the souls of the ritual leaders and others whose paraphernalia and ornaments were fused, forging interpersonal and intercommunity cooperation. The Hopewell metaphor of blending artifacts, blending souls, and forming cooperative social relationships again is key to making sense of Hopewell ceremonies and material productions. The third metaphor that Scioto Hopewell peoples employed in creating their intercommunity alliance is one that was widespread across the woodlands at contact. The domestic dwelling was equated linguistically with a large ceremonial building, a ceremonial dance ground, a mound, and/or a whole ceremonial center. In turn, these correspondences equated the family with the community, a multi-community cooperative, a confederacy, and/or the cosmos at large. The correspondences evoke the appropriateness of family-like ties, ethics, and cooperation at these broader social scales. We see this metaphor actively employed by Scioto Hopewell peoples at the Mound City site. The subrectangular shape of most known Scioto Hopewell domestic structures was repeated at the Mound City Ceremonial Center at multiple scales. Individual cremation basins, the multi-person great mica grave, charnel house rooms and whole charnel houses, and the earthworks wall. Also expressing the metaphor were the site-conjoined charnel house and the Edwin Harness charnel house. Thus, the three Scioto Hopewell communities equating a charnel house with a big domestic house, burying their dead together in that house, and mantling it with one mound, would have fashioned the social identities of the community's deceased and living members as one big household and as having family-like cooperation with one another. In sum, Scioto Hopewell peoples actively lived three worldview metaphors of interpersonal cooperation in their joint mortuary ceremonies. Their unique earthwork shapes, charnel house forms, mound constructions, means of disposing of their dead and their ritual paraphernalia, and their intercommunity alliance all actively express these metaphors. If we are to make sense of Scioto Hopewell people's material and social creations, it is necessary to set aside the assumptions of our Western cultural worldviews and to explore theirs, their logic, their motivations, and their worldview metaphors. Scioto Hopewell worldview has a core place in our explanatory frameworks. Thank you for listening. May your days be good ones.